Hello, and welcome to the Soul Shaking Love podcast. I'm Valerie Green from CoachValerieGreen.com, and this podcast is dedicated to bringing you the world's expert teachers on how to build a mind, body, and spirit connection, both with yourself and with your true love. And I'm so excited for this topic today because we're taught that anger is not part of a deep emotional connection, but of course it is. And so I am really excited to interview Davina Hain. Hi, Davina.
Hi.
And we were chatting before this, and it made me even more excited about the topic because the topic is how anger is not the problem in relationships. Rather, rupture without repair is the problem in relationships. And I know that firsthand from my own marriage. Davina will share that from her marriage too. We're going to really be talking about her specialty. So I'll tell you a little bit about her, because this really is her specialty. She is a trained therapist turned mental health coach, speaker, and founder of A Steady Space, which she'll tell you about during the interview. And she helps people transform explosive reactions, simmering resentment, and shut down habits, fun things, into emotional clarity and connection, which is just so wonderful. And her work is really deeply personal to her because her own personal story of healing in her own marriage and rewriting the patterns that she inherited really caused her to specialize in anger intelligence and building healthier communication. And she really is passionate about helping to strengthen families across generations and empowering parents to raise children in ways worth repeating. So that is just so wonderful for all of those out there who are either don't have kids, but you're fighting, which I know, a lot of my clients do, or you do have kids and you want to raise your kids in a more conscientious environment. I think that this interview will really speak to you. So without further ado, hello, Davina. And, I'm sure, I know that you said that you would share your story throughout, so we don't need to start there unless you want to. We could either start with you sharing about what is your story about how you learn how to transform anger into deeper connection, or we could just start out talking about why is anger so demonized and how do you look at it instead? And then, of course, I'm sure you will share your story.
Yes, and I try to follow the squirrel up the trunk of the tree, but every so often I go down every branch. So please feel free to rein me in as we go. But yeah, anger is one, the emotion that I avoided the most, I think, growing up and in my marriage and in my relationship prior to us getting married, but it is something that now I've learned to harness and understand as my compass and something that demands advocacy from me. And so I know that the villainization of it comes from the aggression that typically comes as a result of anger, right? That is destructive, that causes a lot of harm. And my marriage was no different. My upbringing was no different. It's just more so about what we've learned to understand about it in order to propel us forward, in order to rewrite the narrative and not just save my and my husband's marriage, but fully rewrite it from the ground up, rebuild it, and allow for us to feel like we thrive and that we really do connect and, of course, repair after each of these ruptures come through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love hearing that because, I think a lot of my clients are still surprised to understand that anger is not the problem and that conflict is not the problem. It's learning how to navigate it skillfully. That is the opportunity, because conflict just means that you have the opportunity to grow and to get to know each other on a deeper level. But, we're not really taught that.
No, we're not. We're taught to avoid. And there is that part that my husband back in the day was more of an external expressor of anger. So it was more of the traditional masculine aggression that we typically see, breaking things, punching things, storming out, that whole deal. And mine was much more of the feminine, more womanly, more quiet anger, the internal expressor, the internal shove down and emotionally punish externally kind of experience. And it's actually what got me into anger management was an attempt to fix my husband because we didn't know how to fight clean. We didn't know how to not cause collateral damage when we were upset and disappointed. And our distress tolerance they were very different. I leaned way more anxiously attached, and he was disorganized, avoidant, something within that way. And so it would turn into us attempting to address something, and then he'd respond like shit, and then I would be mad at him for responding like shit, and then it would become this whole new thing, and then he would try to leave, and I would block the door and not let him leave, and then he would break something, and then he would eventually leave, and then I would chase my happy ass like all the way down the road. It was just all of these attempts to connect, all of these attempts to feel that safety, to achieve emotional intimacy, but neither one of us had any idea how to actually do it. And so when I finished my master's in forensic psychology and I really wanted something different than the traditional therapeutic approach, I really wanted something more skills-based, and I didn't know where to start, I looked at my husband and was like, ding, ding, ding. I can fix you. I can fix you. I can get the intersect of the forensic side and the psychology side. And so I chose anger management trying to fix him, not knowing what anger management was, which I don't think many of us do. It was just like where you go when you're angry and then you come back fixed.
Right.
So I got trained in this, and it was during that training, within the first 2 hours of it, that the walls kind of caved in, started closing in on me. And I was like, oh no, I'm the problem too. I'm contributing to this really poor dynamic. And it really forced me to see ways that I contributed. And so that's where everything kind of started, was me being open to seeing that I'm not fixing him. Our dynamic is problematic. And so we're both contributing. And really how and what to do about it came next.
Right. No, that makes so much sense, because it is usually the person who is the outward expressor where it can turn aggressive. And, as you know, and I'm sure you'll talk more about this than I will, but there's a difference between anger, which is the emotion, versus aggression, which is the behavior. And, self-regulation and co-regulation and repair is so important. But it sounds like, he had more aggressive behavior, but your behavior, in that cycle, it's a really demonstrative way of talking about it. He would try to leave, which isn't helpful either. And, when he would, you would try to stop him, which, or chase him, which does contribute. But it's very, very common, as you know, for couples to get caught in that cycle where it just escalates with each other, and then both people are contributing to the problem. And, I look forward to you sharing how to turn it around, of course.
Yes.
But first, I think it would be useful to talk about what is the difference between healthy anger, which is the emotion, and expressing it in a healthful way, versus reactive or destructive anger.
Yeah. And I think from when we hear that question, it can feel kind of obvious, but a lot of people are surprised when I refer to anger as healthy. They've only learned it. Somebody said to me the other day, they were brought up with the notion that anger is one letter away from danger. So to basically avoid it at all costs. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'd never heard that before, surprisingly. But it really is this very surprising thing for people to get permission to view anger in a good, healthy way. Because healthy anger is a catalyst. Healthy anger points us toward blind spots that we don't have, helps us see where we've been vulnerable, at risk, where we lack safety, respect, these types of things. And it points us in a direction for us to go. The thing is, it whispers and we ignore it. Mm-hmm. And then it screams and we can't ignore it. And then we end up being the one who screams. And then that becomes the more reactive thing. So the healthy anger is more so listening to what it's saying and taking it as data, trying to decipher its messaging, and then taking action as a result of it, versus just this flared me and then I just take off running, quite literally sometimes, with what comes up. But that's what I've now been able to understand is when people are angry with me, it's not opportunities for disconnection. It's not that they're trying to disconnect with me. It's not that they're trying to criticize me or make me feel small. It's that they're attempting to tell me something doesn't feel right in them. And I might be that conduit. I might be the cause of it. But it's really just a desperate attempt at expressing vulnerability, but in a way that in our survival center just won't allow for us to.
Yeah, no, exactly. I know. Yeah, because anger a lot of times comes up when we have a boundary crossed or when we're not honored in some way, or, even if we're just, well, if we're extending ourselves, we could feel angry.
Totally.
And yeah, that's information as to what we need more or less of. And I agree, if we listen when it's soft inside of us, or when it's, scale of 1 to 10, when it's like below a 5, if we can hear it before then of course we can say, oh, it looks like I have a boundary. How do I assert it in a more calm way, or just, without allowing it to sound aggressive. But of course we can't always do that. Life happens. We can't always slow down and pay attention to the subtle feelings. A lot of times we don't notice it until it is really loud. And so what is actually happening in the nervous system during an emotional blow up, right? We go into kind of fight mode. So, what's that about?
Yeah, I mean, really, our brain and our nervous system, they're attempting to get predictability. So when we're talking about our wiring, our attachment, our ability to tolerate distress, we're talking about an operating system that has been ingrained, that was pre-programmed from a time that we likely don't have a conscious memory of, and we're just operating on autopilot. So what a lot of people come to me with is a lot of regret, a lot of shame, a lot of disgust in their behavior, and knowing better but can't do better, right? Like not being able to bridge that gap. And what we tend to assume is that it's this character defect, that it's a moral failing, that it's a lack of self-control, when in reality, it is an operating system, a wiring that hasn't been updated yet. It's a muscle that hasn't gotten enough reps in order to build those bridges. So what I really want people to understand more than anything is the neurophysiology of it, the nervous system, the way that we're built, that what happens is it perceives a threat within a fifth of a second, faster than the blink of an eye.
Wow.
We don't consciously realize it, but the survival center that has allowed for us to evolve to this level does. And our body immediately floods with cortisol. We already start going through the predictable experience of what I should do when I perceive a threat. And if we aren't learning that about ourselves, if we aren't doing that inventory on ourselves and learning to listen to the cues of our body before our rational, conscious brain can catch up to it, then we will continue repeating all of the things that we haven't repaired yet. And when I first started doing this work, when I first got into therapy and psychology and mental health, there was still that very strong separation between mind and body. It was like psychosomatic was like a bigger divide than we ever thought. And it was almost surprising to hear that what happens in our mind could affect our body. Whereas now, thankfully, we're finally getting really good, starting to rather, get really good at understanding that there's not just that connection, we are embedded. We're meant to be connected. And so what I always want people to start with is learning more about our body, about our physiology, and feeling less like a failure and more like somebody who's just wired to react in a certain way that's predictable based on their environmental cues. And then starting to unwrite it, rewrite it, take it apart, and reverse engineer it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I really resonate with what you're saying, because to speak about our relationship, my husband his mom was extremely emotionally available, and she taught him that, when you're angry, you just say, so I'm angry because of this reason, and we'll work it out. And so he always has, when he's angry, he told me in the beginning of our relationship, like, true anger is silent. True anger is like, I notice it inside of me and I say, hey, this is not working for me. Something needs to change. But I can say it in a rational way. And I really respect that about him. it's why he didn't really understand my way of expressing anger. And we really had to process it. And thankfully, because I'm a relationship coach, I'm an expert in repair. And so when we did have explosive arguments, mostly because he doesn't understand the way I get reactive, then I know how to repair afterwards and, make us be emotionally close again, not make us, but, inspire that really degree of closeness. But like for me, and my dad was a very loving person in many ways, but he was also had a pretty abusive childhood without therapy. And so when he got angry, it was really explosive and really loud. And we would just butt heads and yell at each other all the time, basically, my dad and I. And so that's how I learned to express anger, is through yelling. And, it really kind of intimidates my husband, when I get like that. And now, of course, I have a lot of work on learning to self-soothe and to co-regulate. We actually have a poem about co-regulation. That's really cute. But, it really does stem from our childhood programming and from the ways that anger was modeled. And, it's kind of like parents say, do as I say, not as I do. But of course, we can't help. We're little sponges, we can't help, our nervous systems can't help emulating the way that people displayed anger around us. And, it has to do with our attachment style. It has to do with our modeling. So do you want to share more about that?
Yeah, one, very true. We tried that parenting. Thankfully, our kids were young when we were much more wounded than we are now and very toxic for each other. And it was that when we're talking about that part of our brain that flares when we perceive a threat, it's happening so quickly and it's almost always visual. So when we're saying, do as I say, not as I do, our kids aren't hearing the words. Their amygdala is firing. They're in survival mode. They're only doing what they see.
Right.
And so for us, what we saw was my sons, I'm raising two boys, two men I'm raising. And when they were showing me what I look like when I'm mad, it wasn't cute. And it pissed me off. And it felt disrespectful. And I was like, oh shit, like this isn't, all right, I see what's happening here. Like I see that you are showing me back to me, but because it's in a smaller package and it's more feral, I will assume that it's a you problem. I'll assume it's my kid's problem. I will ship them off to some specialist and assume that like they are the problem. But it really is these ways that we learn how to adapt in the world by watching, by experiencing, not by listening, which is why, or even before we hit record, we were talking about when people tell each other to calm down or relax. The words make sense. Yeah. No, it's not going to happen. There's a disconnect there. And as much as I can tell them, take a deep breath, calm your heart. If I'm doing that while furrowing my brow, making my body big, putting my finger in their face with a loud volume, no, they're not going to do shit. They're going to be like, why don't you do that first? Like, you start. Like after you, mom. And so it really is understanding not to blame, right? I fundamentally believe in empowering people to live steadier lives through radical self-responsibility. And that radical self-responsibility doesn't mean blame and shame and regret and disgust. It's owning it, understanding it, explaining it, not excusing it, but allowing for us to really see that when we engage in really crummy ways, when we repeat patterns that hadn't been repaired in front of us or for us, that's I'm now responsible for that. I'm not to blame for it. I do carry responsibility for it. And when no one else has done this for us or with us or before us, it feels like a really heavy burden to bear. And it feels like an injustice. And that sparks more anger and more frustration and more resistance to the process. But if we can take radical self-responsibility to say, right, what upset me isn't great, was valid, what I did with it wasn't great, what I inherited wasn't great, what I'm doing with it is making it cute, I'm going to clean it up, I'm going to make it better. It allows for us to then, again, parent in ways worth repeating. again, model in front of our children what it looks like to regulate in real time, how to repair in real time. And my husband and I, our kids roll their eyes at us at this point because we tell them often, like, we weren't taught this. We're learning alongside you. We're trying to help you get a head start. We really learned this in our late 20s and 30s, right? Our marriage nearly ended because we didn't know these things. My husband nearly took his own life because we didn't know these things.
Wow.
He is now 5 years sober nearly because we didn't know these things before. And
Wow.
we're really trying to help our kids get a head start. But if we can't show them glimpses of what it looks like, if we can't model it, it's, again, do as I say, not as I do. We lose credibility, they lose respect, and the cycle just continues.
Yep. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I think that it's a very inspiring story how you really learn together and you're, learning to model it, alongside them and, sharing with them. Like, we didn't learn this growing up, and we're learning alongside you. And that's such a humble place to come from. And, as kids really respect parents who can be vulnerable about their own process within, without sharing too much, of course. And, but, it really touches me to hear that, it's like so, and I completely agree. There's no room for blame in healing, and it's like, I don't blame my parents because it's not their fault how they related to anger, because nobody taught them either. If anything, like, when I'm angry at myself, it's not about blaming myself either. It's about, like, anger is such a powerful force for change. There's so much energy in it. If I'm saying, hey, I'm angry at myself for not getting past this pattern, it's like, oh, well, then what do I want instead? Yeah. And, I can, like, actually use the force of the anger to say, what I'm going to do is to self-regulate and to get in touch with my emotional needs and to advocate for my emotional needs in a healthy way, but it does take so much discipline to do that if, we weren't raised with that awareness. And so I feel inspired that that's what you're modeling for your kids, is how to really learn how to self-regulate and showing them what that means. And so I want to ask you then, what does it really mean to self-regulate and to respond differently in the moment before things escalate?
Oh yeah, it's so hard. It really is. It's what it really means is to just keep an active inventory on ourselves. And a lot of it is self-talk. A lot of it is preemptive, right? Because I specialize in anger, there's so many people that will come in our first session. When I was doing in-persons, they would sit down on the couch, in front of me, and they'd say, so do you just, like, say something to upset me, or where do we start? It feels like it has to be in the moment. We don't realize the trail of events before it gets there, right? So much of this is just about being mindful and learning more about what things flare me up and acting very much in prevention. And I'm a very firm believer that so much of the things that flare us are a cause of impractical expectations, maybe even unmet expectations or expectations we didn't even realize we had until they were violated. And then I'm just pissed that they got violated, that now I'm just, like, all flared up. So much of it is about managing ourselves, staying conscious as long as we possibly can of our own habits and flares and patterning and cycles and these types of things. But in real time, when things flare us up, it's listening to what our body is telling us and being willing to follow through on those signs. So when things happen with my kids, I still flare up, I still say the wrong thing, I still get loud. Absolutely. Every so often, I'm getting better. But it's this very slow, incremental approach to, now when my heart races or I get loud, that should be my first sign. That becomes my first sign of, like, ooh, hold up, right? And working to adjust the narrative in real time. So the self-talk is massive. It really helps things kind of focus in on what the problem is, not just the problematic solution that I'm coming up with. But what that looks like in real time is if I notice my husband seems off, or he seems upset with me, or whatever that is, my more anxious attachment tendencies will flare up, and I'm going to want to I'm going to want to get in and check on him and see what's going on, and, are you mad at me? And annoy the shit out of him, trying to figure out what's wrong. But it's that kind of narrative that then I can see that I flared, right? Like I can sense there's a heavier energy. I can feel like this tether almost start to build between me and him, where like I just want to like pull him in close and fix and find what's wrong and find out what I did wrong, even though it probably had nothing to do with me in the first place. And it's just picking up on what's happening in my body, and then following up with that self-talk of, oof, I noticed a shift. Oh, that feels heavy on my heart. I'm worried. I'm now feeling insecure about where our relationship is, right? And just starting to assign a narrative, bring meaning to the emotion, to the experience that's coming through. And the same thing with my kids is I hear myself get loud. Sometimes it feels good. Sometimes I feel powerful and empowered and like, wow, I'm in control, and I get to offset this energy that I have. And it's about that. It's about noticing the shift in their face when I get loud and seeing that as a cue to remind me to simmer down, to remove myself, to take a deep breath and reset myself and be able to calm my heart before I even attempt to tell them how to calm theirs. So much of this is about attunement in our own bodies, listening to these cues very subtly, very, very, very slowly over time until we flare up and we can catch it that much faster and we can bring ourselves back down. But I think what happens is a lot of us flare up. We get loud, we get big, we have adult tantrums, we absorb our kids' feral energy, and then we just feel so terrible about it later that we walk it all the way back, that we somehow have to gaslight ourselves into thinking that I shouldn't have been mad in the first place. We apologize for the entire thing. We don't know how to accept multiple truths, that yes, that was valid and what I did with it was gross. And then we set ourselves up for failure. I did the same thing. Regretted at night, felt really shitty, woke up the next morning, I'm Mary Poppins, making Mickey Mouse pancakes for breakfast, and like, hey kids, like I'm just like walking on a cloud, acting like everything's fine. And it just doesn't work that way, as we know. There has to be that discussion around repair, that there has to be that self-regulation, that self-talk, that self-soothing strategy, the listening to all of these cues. But again, it has to start so incrementally and slowly and with that awareness in the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah, you just said some really wonderful nuggets. I want to, really highlight what you said, because I think, first of all, you really demonstrated what it means to attune to yourself and also attune to the other. So attuning to yourself, what I heard is really paying attention. And obviously we can't always do this, which is why repair afterwards is so important, which yes. I'm sure you'll talk about in a bit. But slowing down and really feeling like, oh, my heart rate just got elevated. My breathing just got shallow. Anger, a lot of times I feel as a heat rising in my body, or like I can feel my throat tightening, or I can feel my solar plexus tightening, or I can feel my rib cage tightening, or something like that. And it's like, if I catch it, then I can attune to myself and I can say, what is it? Right. What is the narrative? Right. And give myself compassion for that. I really want to know what's going on. I really want to fix it. Give myself compassion for that. But obviously that's not the strategy, right? So it's like, what's the truth about that story? The truth is probably that he doesn't have anything to do with me, and that he'll talk about it when he's ready, and now is not the time. So therefore, what do I need, right? I need clarity, but I'll get that later, so then how can I be patient during that time? And you're like really learning how to attune to yourself. Or like, if you actually calm down your nervous system, then maybe there's a way where you can approach them and be curious, like, hey, is there something going on with you? Like, you actually seem a little off. Like, is there any support you need? Right? Like, that's coming from attuning to yourself and figuring out that the need is clarity. And the anger pointed you towards that need. And so that's what it means to attune to yourself. And what it means to attune to the other, which I also love that you just said, is if you notice that, and we can't help it, we can't help coming from our programming sometimes, we can't help, as you said, if you have kids, a lot of times you just absorb their energy and you are influenced by their nervous system and you might get really loud, but it's like as soon as you do that, you attune to the reaction that your behavior is causing in them. And that does take a lot of presence. But the moment that you notice that, if you're really, that's why, in my opinion, attuning to yourself is a skill that has to come first. Because, once you're practiced at that, then you can be present enough, even if you do kind of get loud, to notice the reaction in the other person and kind of rein yourself in and be like, actually, oh, I'm attuning to them. That impact is not what I want. Apologize for being loud, saying, hey, let me go to the next room and self-regulate and come back when I'm more calm. Right. And so that's a beautiful description of what it means to self-regulate and then also to attune to the other. And, I know that you also wanted to talk about what are the mistakes that we make other than that, what are all the mistakes that we make when, anger shows up? What are the most common ones, just so that we can identify the opposite before we really go into, well, how do we repair if that happens?
Yeah. And I used to attune so much more to other people. I was much more anxious, more enmeshed, more codependent, very hyper-vigilant of other people's energies and their emotions. And that's why I went into mental health, right? Isn't there that part of us that just wants to make it cute for other people and be their Band-Aid? And what I did originally for my husband, for my kids, was attune to them. But because I didn't know how to attune to myself, I didn't know how to regulate on my own, and this is one of the mistakes I think a lot of us as parents make, is attuning so deeply, seeing their face change, and then immediately feeling dread. And this sinking feeling where it feels like my heart just dropped into my tummy and out of my ass. I don't know what to do with it. I flush. I'm so embarrassed and I feel so crummy and I just feel so gross that I can't give myself any room to validate what I felt. I just have to bend and break in order to make everything better for them. And so I do find it to be so important that we have that inside of us. And as a little bit of a segue, or tangent rather, my son the other day, I was driving him to school, and it wasn't the other day, it was a few weeks ago. And I was driving him to school, and we were late, chronically late, and I was leading with a lot of urgency. And we got in the car and I was frustrated. He forgot his water bottle. He forgot this, he forgot that. And so we were even more late. And I didn't listen to my body. I didn't take this 10 seconds it would take for me to gain some clarity and perspective of he can be tardy one day. It's okay if he needs to be. But the way that I leave him is the way that he will go throughout his entire day. And I don't want to leave him frazzled. But I didn't do that in the moment. I was just running. And on our way, out of nowhere, because the car is silent, I'm stewing and he's just oh God, I don't know what to do back here. And on the way out of nowhere, or not out of nowhere, but out of the silence, he says, hey, do you remember that time in the Vegas house when you threw down the mac and cheese? And I was like, oh shit. You remember that. I thought you were too young to remember that. Kind of desperately hoping that he hadn't remembered that consciously, that this isn't something that's now within his working memory, this image of his mom being just irate and feral and not listening to her body, not regulating herself. And I was cooking, I was about to make the mac and cheese, and they had said something, and it was the one in that clear cellophane, and I threw it down and the bag burst.
Aww.
It went everywhere. And not my best moment by any means. And it was in that moment that I felt so sad. And I found myself going down this like swirling pit of, oh God, he remembers that. That's so gross. I was hoping that all of the work I've done between then and now would almost erase it. And he has that mental image of me. And oh my God, what does that mean for his future? And it's, oh my gosh, like all of this kind of catastrophizing that can come from it. And instead, and it's so crazy because when I talk about it, it sounds like that took a long time for me to notice the pit of despair and then pull myself back. But it was probably a few seconds. And I said, oh, you remember that? And he said, well, yeah, I do. I was like, okay. I was like, yeah.
I'm laughing, but I know it is sad.
Yeah. And I was like, what made you think of it? And he said, well, you seem kind of the same right now as you did then. And I was like, oh, right. Your body remembers. That's familiar for you. And so I, of course, needed to make myself feel better at that moment. I was like, well, like, to what degree? Like, what percentage would you say? Like, what was she at? What am I at? Like, how am I? I need I can't read the label from inside the jar. Like, tell me what your perception of me was. And so he would have made it on time, but instead we consciously chose to let him be tardy. And I pulled over and we talked. And we talked it out. I understood his perspective, where that came from. I shared with him what I'm working on, what to put on his radar for him to know where I'm placing that energy. And we really did take that full repair. So what would have been a continued rushing to just like kiss and drop and have him run into class turned into an intentional late 10 minutes to repair, walking him up to the entrance of the school, saying bye in a very like conscientious, close, intimate way, and then leaving and not letting myself fall within that despair, So it was a reminder that I think a lot of us need to know that even somebody like me who specializes in this, I still struggle within it. I still lose my shit. I still say the wrong thing. I still do the wrong thing. And how much of this, of course, is about that repair, but where our kids remembering these things and us consciously knowing that our kids remember these versions of us that are so wounded, and allowing for it to be right. Well, what am I going to do about it? Mm-hmm. Right. That does exist. I will take radical self-responsibility over the fact that that is the way that I used to react. And the way that I am now, while it's to a much lesser degree, it rhymes. And I'm allowed to acknowledge that and reduce the intensity over time without expecting that I wouldn't experience that at all. So that was very tangential, but I think I really wanted to break that down into the thought processes and what it actually looks like in real time, to have our kids hold this mirror to us and have us see something that's really not cute, but not be mad at them for holding it up to us at all, and like showing it to us.
And that's such an inspiring story. I feel really touched hearing it because it shows how courageous you are. I think most people, when they feel that despair, they would go into a shame spiral. And, it's not like that means that there's something wrong with you, but we think that it does in the moment, and not know what to do to repair. And not know what to do differently, and just go, oh crap, he remembers that of me. Now he's going to think of me that way. It's been so long since then. There's nothing I can do since there's all this work that we've done to repair it and it hasn't worked, right? But it's like, I'm sure you had all those thoughts in your head, and instead you were able to self-regulate enough and get curious with him, and then pull over and actually fully repair, so that, because that is what the research shows, is that, kids are incredibly resilient. If you model repair, that's actually what allows them to let it go. If he's still holding on to it, then it's because there hasn't been enough repair, and I know you've done a lot to repair, but it's like, it isn't enough until it is, right? Yes. And, just like all nervous systems, it just needs enough repetition in order to like actually trust that it's different now. Mm-hmm. I think that's a wonderful segue into what does repair look like in real time? What was, you can use that as an example if you want, like the actual conversation that you had with him to repair. Because I think, or you could use a different example, but I think, a lot of people, after they wind up acting unskillfully, they don't know how to repair, and they don't know how to not just feel ashamed of themselves, and they don't know how to, and I kind of have pride myself as having come up with nonviolent idioms. So it's like, I like to say, to not throw the soap out with the bathwater. Instead of maybe, but it is like throwing the soap out with the bathwater. If we say, oh, I shouldn't have been angry, then you're not getting the message that the anger was trying to tell you in the first place. But that's what a lot of people do to repair. It's very common that the next day it's like they'll feel guilty. And so then they'll just try to be nice. And, that is what happened with me and my dad. And, like I said, it wasn't his fault. He never learned what repair was. And so he would be really angry, and we'd have these really massive blowouts where he'd actually like pick me up and put me outside the room, and then like, and lock the door, like, and say, go to your room until you calm down, and like, I mean, of course I was still welcome to come back for dinner, but then like we have dinner and everything's fine.
Yeah.
And like nothing happened. And like, let's just be nice to each other now. And it's like, then I'm left with, it's not better. And he's acting as if it's better. And he's like, well, why can't we just act as if it's better? And it's like, because it's not. And it's like, I had to learn, and, like I said, not his fault, because like we need to learn strategies to repair. And it's one of the reasons why I was so focused on learning strategies to repair. And I like to say that like, I'm actually better at repair than I am at always managing my own reactivity. Because
totally.
It's like, yes, once you know how to repair, all you need to do after the fact is, calm your nervous system to however long that takes, and then go through the steps of repair. But of course, a lot of people don't know what those steps are. So I would love to have you talk about it.
Yeah, what I think ends up happening is we feel so bad that we just can't tolerate hearing how bad it was for other people. And so we do try to just shove it away. We do try to, just like I did, I hope that they don't remember, hope that just the cute, the clean, the smiles will outweigh the heavy, the yells, the noodles all over the floor. Thankfully, they were raw. But there's still that part that it's a lot of repair that I've noticed is our willingness to just sit through them sharing how I affected them poorly. A lot of the time we just try to move on. I used to not be able to tolerate it when people would tell me and play it back for me what I did to upset them or disrespect them or wrong them in some way. I would get this like, enough. Like, I get it, enough. I'm already shitting all over myself. Like, you don't need to, don't worry. Like, I'm punishing myself enough that you don't have to. Please just trust me. And one, all that does is further the divide and really dig the wound in deeper.
Right.
But it's so much about that willingness to view their experience as data instead of an internal behavioral or an internal kind of character defect.
Yeah.
Right? Like the complaint versus criticism, right? Like, I did a bad thing. I'm not a bad person. I did a disrespectful thing. I'm not a disrespectful person. I made a mess. I'm not a messy person, right? And really pull myself out of that narrative, which is so incredibly hard for those of us whose identity felt like it was rooted in self-deprecation. Mm-hmm. And the radical self-responsibility was really just being really mean to myself constantly. So then I didn't have any room for other people to tell me how I was mean to them.
Right.
And so that's the biggest point of repair that I've noticed is holding it with them, acknowledging it. When what I used to do and what I see a lot of us parents do, and even in our relationships and our marriages, we repair by telling them what they felt, how I made them feel, what I did wrong, and I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And while that's part of it, there's so much more about what was your experience? Mm-hmm. Here's an explanation for my behavior, no excuse for it. What was that like for you? What came up for you? And then I always like to share what I will be doing differently. Not just I won't do it again, because you will, and then you're going to feel like an absolute failure when you mess up again in the exact same way. And then your words don't carry weight anymore.
Right.
But more so, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do instead. I want this to be on your radar. Here's what I'm going to try next time. Instead of shouting, I'm going to tell you that I need a minute. Or, hey, here's a word that we can use. Like my son, he and I use stairs because we had a conversation while sitting on the stairs about whatever flared us up. So now we say the word stairs to each other to remind us of that conversation, and it helps bring us both down. But we come up with a solution that's not just extincting the behavior that's deeply impractical and setting us both up for failure. But that repair, it has to be tangible. So much of the work that we do is so abstract. And then we get a case of the fuck it's, because then it just seems like it's just too much to change and too much to fix all at once. And then, okay, fine, I'll just stay the way that I am. What's done is done. The harm is done. I can't change it.
Right.
And we feel so powerless.
Exactly. And then it probably will happen again. I mean, obviously it probably will anyway, but, but like then we won't be able to repair when it happens again. And then that causes more shame. And I imagine, because I think that you just described that so beautifully, it's really about, giving a deep empathy for their experience. And in order to do that, because I know what the research shows is that the other person holds that hurt in their, in their nervous system until they can feel that we're moved by their pain. Yeah. Because if we're moved by their pain, then it's likely that even if it happens again, that we're not the aggressor. It sort of, speaks to their amygdala that we're not the aggressor, that we actually care. At least that's, I forget where I learned that, but I have a blog post on my website about repair too. And, I talk about that. And I think that you really demonstrated that well, that if you're not also able to have self-compassion for your own feelings and validate your own anger, and there's a reason for it, even though the way that you reacted out of it was unskillful. If you're still shaming yourself, then you're not really going to be moved by their pain because it's going to increase your shame. And so you need to be able to validate your feelings and forgive the reaction and have a workable strategy for what you're going to do differently next time, because it is going to happen again, but you have ways of handling it skillfully. And so if, after you really communicate that you're moved by their pain and then you explain what's going to happen next time, then you become trustable again. And, then you occur to the other person as safe because, everybody makes mistakes, and you're really modeling that it's okay to make mistakes if you take responsibility, and you take responsibility both for your behavior and for the impact. And, that's, I think, a really wonderful example. And I'm imagining that, because if your kids had grown up without that, then they probably wouldn't be able to handle other people's unskillful anger in the world. But because they know where it comes from and they know how to not take it personally because of the repair process that you're going through, obviously you don't want to keep on hurting their feelings. So, I know that you are always, working on how to come from a more skillful place. And at the same time, everybody makes mistakes. And if you repair whenever you make a mistake, that's how you bring the connection back.
Yeah. One of the things that I did for myself, because I didn't know how to hold that, I didn't know how to just not be so mean to myself, I do my best to separate that version of me from this version of me. She goes by my maiden name. She has a whole different identity. I refer to her as such. I had to be able to pull that version of me apart from this version of me, because it was too challenging for me to believe that I could rise while I was still being dragged down by her and her wounds, And so what I always suggest we start with is just give that version of you a name. Even the version from 2 minutes ago from now, right? Like, we have this more visceral, more raw, more, what's the word I want? It's more of like this survival version of us that exists, that was pre-programmed, that's our wiring, our inheritance in this way. And then we have this version that is really working to evolve. And so long as we refer to both of them as me and I, it's harder to distinguish, it's harder to separate. So what I strongly suggest, and what I did in real time with my son that day, was I pictured her. She's not me. I'm built from her. She's not me, though, right? And so it allowed for me to hold that apart and say, oh, right, that was the mom he had for quite some time. She existed. That was his experience of her. I feel so confident in my ability to not be her again, even though we rhyme, even though I resemble her a lot of the time. There's still that part that I needed to tear her apart from me so that I could view her more objectively. I can give her advice, give this version of me advice in a way that I would give her as my friend. Because I can't read the label from inside the jar. I'm too close to me, but I'm really good at my job. I'm really good at what I do. But for some reason, when it's me, I can't see it. So I had to pull her apart and say, right, that version of me, that one, was going through an incredibly challenging time, and she allowed her wounding to bleed on her kids. And rather than just getting so bogged down in the despair and the injustice of that for my kids, it's instead like, damn, what was she needing? She didn't have this capability. She didn't have these skills. She didn't have this knowledge and this ability to be compassionate with herself. What did she need? And whatever that answer is what this version of me gives myself now. And it sounds like I get resistance sometimes from clients who's like, that's a cop-out. That's some bullshit. Like, I'm just going to like pull that part of me away and like remove the responsibility and the accountability. And no, you give yourself the opportunity to view yourself more clearly, to gain that clarity, to get a bit objective with yourself. And I'm not saying that she's not I'm not responsible for things that she did 100%. I can now give her the grace and compassion in order to be this version of me that needs to learn from her. Exactly. And not just be constantly paying for her mistakes in these ways.
Yeah. And, I see like what paying for her mistakes would mean is if you still identify as that, then it's harder to, differentiate so that you can give that part of yourself compassion. It's similar. I see it as similar to like doing inner child work. For example, your inner child is also you. It's a part of you, just like your past self is a part of you, but you're not that anymore. And so it's easier to give compassion for the impact of how you acted in the past. If somebody is really hurt by how you acted in the past, it's so much easier to give empathy and compassion to that person if you know that you've evolved since then. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to take responsibility for who you were back then and apologize and say, that wasn't okay to do. And here's how I've evolved since then. And here's how I'll do it differently now and in the future. But it helps you to not feel shame so greatly that you can't be present for his feelings. And so I think that's actually a really brilliant strategy.
Yeah, I mean, we give her a name. Some people go by their maiden. Most people tend not to like their middle names. So a lot of my clients refer to themselves as their middle name. And so my whole thing is, if you can find a way to love that version of you, you'll end up loving that name for yourself.
Yeah.
You can hold compassion for her. Sometimes people like version 1.0, 1.5, 2.0, whatever kind of works for us. But it's incredibly powerful. And we need that. We are oftentimes our own worst critic, and anger, the unhealthy reactive aggression that comes from that unhealthy anger, is almost always just bred from guilt and shame.
Exactly.
The negative guilt, right? Like it's just what it does. And so if we can give ourselves room to lead with more curiosity, not to give ourselves a pass, but instead to use that as data for us to move through to this next version of us. We can see the healthy ways that we used to get sparked and just the unhealthy things that we used to do with that spark.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's very well said. So yeah, I mean, I think we are close to time, and you've said so many wonderful tools and skills. And I know you have a free gift, of course. I want to ask you before we end, just what's one shift that listeners can make today to relate to anger more constructively? You know, because I know that it does. There's several steps that you mentioned, and I think they're all important.
Yeah, it's lead with curiosity about what sparks you. If you were to remove what you did with it, what is the thing that flared you up? And not just the surface level, this person cut me off in traffic or took my parking spot. Not that part. It's what about that? What did that do for you inside? How did that make you feel small? And then from there, we can figure that out. And that's what the anger archetype quiz that I've created does. The anger archetypes are they're an amalgam of my brain. And they basically each serve to protect one thing. And while all of us will likely be flared up by all of these things and react in these ways and have these archetypes within us, what I want all of us to know is what's my primary. When we do this work, there's so many options. There's so many places to focus, put my energy, and sometimes it just feels all-consuming. It's too much. So if you're open to it, take the anger archetype quiz. It's on my website. It's completely free. And you can learn about what flares you. So whether it's the commander, that's for respect, the defender for criticism, the exile for belonging and flares up from rejection. We also have the judge that protects against injustice, and then the sentinel, that's about safety. So at each one of those will point us in the direction of where we could focus. And so if we find, like for me, I'm an exile, most people who've taken my quiz thus far are exiles. And we can look back and say, wow, the last few things that flared me up, were they because of a perceived rejection, a perceived lack of belonging, a perceived feeling of inadequacy? And then we can learn to reverse engineer that and start placing my emphasis in a way that serves to remedy that for me. And that's what I want everyone to start with, is just like learn a little bit about what flares you, not just what you wish you did differently because of it.
Right. Of course, because what we wish we did differently is pay attention to, what is the trigger? And, what is the story that we're making up in that moment? And what do we actually need? Right. And so I'm sure that your quiz, that's of course how I put it, but I'm sure your quiz, when they identify their archetype, then there are self-regulation steps that we can take to really handle the reactivity. Because as my husband said, true anger is silent, meaning if we really know how to self-regulate, we can do that work within us to figure out what it is that we need. And then, if it's, let's say, a boundary violation, say what we want instead. And like, we don't have to be aggressive about that. But of course, we have tons of modeling for people being aggressive with anger. And so we're all going to make mistakes sometimes and not pay attention to our, body sensations that are leading up to it sometimes. And then it's important to forgive ourselves and practice the tools that you teach. So I'm sure that I encourage everybody to take your quiz, and I will definitely put the link either below this video if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening on the podcast platforms, I'll put it in the show notes, because I think that especially now more than ever, the world needs a lot of constructive tools for self-regulation, for dealing with our own anger, for actually looking at what we need underneath, for really learning how to repair effectively, because the world is just getting more polarized. And if everybody had these tools, then we would be able to live in a more harmonious world. And,
Yes.
So I really admire the work that you're doing.
Thank you. It's meaningful and I adore it. It's really an empowering position to be in, and being an agent of change in people's lives and being welcomed into such a raw, vulnerable position and part of their existence is just, it's the deepest honor.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I really look forward to getting this out into the world. And, I really think that so many people could use these tools. And so I really thank you for coming on. And, I hope that everybody does take your quiz. And I'm sure that, they can find out more about you on your website. And so I encourage everybody to look up Davina, because I think that you're such an inspiring example for how to actually use anger for growth and for deeper connection, which is, as I said, so needed.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Yeah. And so I hope that everybody has a really passion-filled rest of your day, because that's the light side of anger is whatever we're passionate about, and that we could use our passion for deeper connection and to serve our purpose in the world. So until next time, bye.
Bye.